The battle began the way most battles did, with light. Commander Holt saw it first as a cascade of red contacts blooming across the tactical display, the sensor arrays of HCNS Meridian feeding him the Vorn approach vector in real time. 47 ships, the initial count. Then 52 as the flanking elements resolved out of the sensor shadow behind the Kareth debris field. Then 61 as the rear element crested the gravitational plane and broke into full sensor range. 61 ships against his fleet of 43, and the Vorn had chosen a wide dispersal pattern, which was interesting, because that was not how the Vorn usually fought. "Fleet Tactical, this is Meridian," Holt said into the command channel, keeping his voice even. "All ships confirm contact. Vorn element designated Hostile Formation Alpha. Initial count 61. Formation assessment. Wide dispersal, axis of advance approximately 317 by -12. Standard engagement protocols active. All captains acknowledge." The acknowledgements came in over the next 40 seconds, 39 voices in measured sequence, the captains of his fleet confirming readiness. Holt stood at the center of Meridian's bridge and watched the two formations close on each other at a combined approach velocity of 0.04 light, which was fast enough for real engagement in under 18 minutes. His hands were behind his back. His eyes moved across the display without settling on any single point. He was reading the overall shape. The Vorn liked density. That was the first thing Holt had learned when the war began, the fundamental piece of tactical grammar that defined how they fought. They packed their formations tight, used layered shield resonance between adjacent ships to multiply defensive effectiveness, and drove hard at the center of an enemy formation with the intention of breaking it into smaller pieces that could be defeated in detail. It was straightforward doctrine, effective against human ships because human captains tended to spread out and use their superior sensor range as a buffer, which meant the Vorn could dictate where the engagement happened while the humans were still gathering information. This formation was spread out. The Vorn ships were maintaining spacing inconsistent with layered resonance, too far apart for it to work, which meant they were giving up their primary defensive advantage before the first shot was fired. Holt noted this and said nothing about it yet. Could mean many things. He needed more information. "Fun," he said. Fun was already standing at the secondary tactical console, 3 steps to Holt's right and 1 step down on the bridge's tiered command level. The position afforded a slightly different angle on the main display, which Fun seemed to prefer, not because the angle changed what was visible, but because the physical separation from the command center gave a fractional psychological distance that Fun had once described, with characteristic precision, as useful for perspective. Fun was 29 years old, born on the colony station Helix 4 to a human mother and a Vorn father, which made Fun exactly one person in a war that had no good category for exactly one person. The Vorn heritage expressed itself primarily in Fun's cognitive architecture, a capacity for simultaneous pattern recognition across multiple nested timescales that human tactical analysts had to construct laboriously with software. Fun could look at a Vorn formation and see not just what it was doing, but what it was setting up, and what that setup was itself setting up 2 moves beyond that. 3 layers deep, without conscious effort. It was, Fun had told Holt once, like reading. The patterns had grammar. The grammar had syntax. And once you learned the syntax well enough, the meaning of a formation was as legible as a sentence. "I see it," Fun said, without looking up from the console. The tone was the one Holt had learned to pay attention to, not alarm, but concentration. The kind that meant something had already registered as significant. They're not presenting a fight surface. They're presenting a permeable structure. Permeable to what? I don't know yet. Give me the first full movement cycle. The first full movement cycle was 12 minutes of engagement data, close enough to real time that calling it data rather than events was mostly a courtesy, since the light lag at this range was under 8 seconds. Holt gave the order to bring the fleet to engagement range, choosing a standard oblique approach that would let him concentrate fire on the Vorn's apparent center of mass while protecting his own rear elements from the dispersed flanking forces. It was the correct response to the formation he was observing. He was reasonably certain, as he gave it, that it was the wrong response to whatever was actually happening. The battle joined. The opening exchange was heavy, Vorn energy weapons crossing with human rail and kinetic fire, the tactical display lighting up with engagement vectors and damage assessments in a language of color and line that Holt had spent 11 years learning to read. 2 of his ships took hull damage in the first 90 seconds, 1 Vorn corvette went dark, 3 others pulled back to secondary position. Standard friction. The formations were finding each other's rhythms, each side probing for the response patterns that would define how the next 40 minutes played out. Holt watched the response patterns. He was watching for something specific, though he could not have named it precisely. A feeling, the kind that came from looking at a thing and noticing that the peripheral detail did not match the center. It was at minute 11 that he first saw it. A gap. Not a tactical withdrawal, not a ship damaged and pulling back to regroup, a gap. Deliberate, structured, appearing in the Vorrn formation at a position that corresponded to a vector that would, if extended, point roughly toward. Holt turned to the navigation overlay. Extended the vector manually. Watched where it pointed. All fleet elements, this is meridian. Hold current engagement posture. I want a full formation record of the last 10 minutes, every Vorrn ship plotted individually, time-stamped at 30-second intervals. He turned to his navigator. Lieutenant Rask, overlay a vector map of all Vorrn course adjustments in the last 8 minutes. Show me where each ship has moved from its initial position. Rask was good. The overlay appeared in 40 seconds. Holt looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Every Vorrn course adjustment in the past 8 minutes, taken individually, looked like a response to the engagement. Ships moving to avoid fire, to press an advantage, to reposition for a better angle. Battle geometry, the kind that generated hundreds of small movements in any fleet action. But the cumulative effect of those movements, the net change in formation geometry, was something else. The Vorrn ships had rearranged themselves. Not randomly. Not as a function of engagement pressure. They had rearranged themselves with a precision that looked like chaos and was not, and the shape they had created had a property that made the back of Holt's neck feel cold. It had a hole in it. On the side facing Relay 7. Fun, Holt said. I'm looking at it, Fun said. Tell me what you see. There was a pause of 4 seconds, which was a long time for Fun. Stage 1 of a corridor construction, Fun said. That's what I see. The rearrangement in the last 8 minutes is stage 1. They're building a path through our formation. Not breaking us, threading through us. Which means, another pause, shorter. They need something to fit through the hole. One ship, Holt said. One ship, Fun confirmed. Something small enough that our formation perimeter looks like open space to it. A corvette, maybe. A dedicated strike vehicle. Fun looked up then, for the first time, and met Holt's eyes across the bridge. Where does the corridor point? Holt had already done the geometry. He pointed at the navigation display without speaking. Relay 7 was marked there as a small gold indicator, 48 light minutes behind the human formation. The chain of relay stations that connected human-occupied space, a grid of 31 installations, each one a node in the faster-than-light communication and navigation network that made deep space viable. If you were in deep space and your jump coordinates were served by the network, you could go anywhere. If the network went down, you were where you were, and staying there until it came back up, however long that took. Relay 7 was the center node, the hub through which every other station's positioning data was routed. You could lose 6 relay stations and the network would reroute. You could lose 12 and it would degrade but function. You could not lose Relay 7. Not because the network had no redundancy, but because the redundancy was organized around Relay 7 the way a wheel was organized around its hub. Take the hub out, the wheel was a collection of unconnected spokes. 237 human ships were currently in deep space transit, dependent on the network for their jump coordinates. Holt looked at the vector from the corridor in the Vorrn formation, extended it to its endpoint. It pointed at Relay 7. Not approximately. Not roughly. With the precision of a solution to a targeting problem, calculated and refined over the 8 minutes since the battle had begun. All fleet captains, this is Commander Holt. He kept his voice level. The tone of command, not urgency, but absolute clarity. The current engagement is a diversion. The Vorrn objective is Relay 7. There is a dedicated strike element somewhere in this formation, and the Vorrn fleet is building a path for it through our perimeter. I am restructuring the fleet posture immediately. All ships prepare to receive new assignments. Execute nothing until I give the order. The channel was silent for a moment. Then Captain Varys of Archon came back, careful and even. Commander, please confirm. You're calling the entire engagement a feint? Yes, Holt said. We have 40 minutes to prove me wrong. The problem with restructuring a fleet in contact was that every ship was already doing something. Not administrative something, tactical something. Fire solutions calculated, shields angled to specific threat vectors, engine output managed around engagement constraints. Every captain had a picture of the battle built up over 11 minutes of actual fighting, and that picture was the foundation of every decision they were currently making. To tell 43 captains that the picture was wrong and they needed a new one, while continuing to shoot and avoid being shot, was an exercise in human cognitive architecture that Holt found genuinely difficult and intensely interesting. He had 12 minutes before he estimated the Vorn would attempt the breakthrough. He based this on Funn's assessment of the corridor construction timeline, which Funn had computed from the rate of formation shift visible in the last 8 minutes, extrapolated forward to the point where the gap in the Vorn perimeter would be wide enough for a ship to transit without entering human weapons range. 12 minutes was not much time. 12 minutes was, in fact, barely enough time to communicate the new tactical picture to his captains, let alone for them to begin acting on it. Funn, I need the strike element identified, Holt said. I need to know which ship it is. Working on it. Funn had pulled up the full Vorn formation record and was running a positional analysis, looking for the ship that was not moving the way the others were, the one whose course changes reflected a different goal from the fleet-wide corridor construction. The others were creating a path. One of them was waiting to use it. Holt turned to the tactical display and started building the new fleet geometry. The core problem was that his fleet was currently arrayed to fight the battle it had been presented. Ships on the left flank were engaging the Vorn left flank. Ships in the center were engaged with the Vorn center element. 3 cruisers were in a hammer formation behind the main line, ready to drive through any opening that appeared. It was a correct response to a conventional fleet engagement. To defend Relay 7, he needed a fundamentally different shape, a shape that put mass between the Vorn corridor and the station it was aimed at, while maintaining enough engagement pressure on the Vorn main fleet that they couldn't simply redirect their entire formation and overwhelm the defense. He couldn't let up on the engagement. If he pulled back, the Vorn would follow, and the corridor would follow with them, pointing at Relay 7 with the same precision because that was the entire point of the exercise. He had to fight and redirect simultaneously. Gallant and strident, he said, flagging the 2 heavy cruisers on his display. New assignment. Break contact with the Vorn left flank and reposition to bearing 289 by +7. You're establishing a secondary perimeter on the Relay 7 approach vector. Full engine output, defensive posture only, do not initiate new engagements. The acknowledgement from Captain Mesa of Gallant was immediate. The acknowledgement from Strident was slightly slower. Captain Obi was a careful thinker, methodical, and methodical captains took a moment longer to accept a significant change in tasking. When Obi's acknowledgement came, it included a question. What are we intercepting? Unknown yet, Holt said. Small craft, probably a corvette. Fast. It will be trying to reach Relay 7 rather than fight you. Your job is to make sure it can't. And if it gets past US? It won't, Holt said, with more certainty than he had, because certainty was the only currency that bought Captain Confidence in the middle of a fight. He redirected 3 frigates from the right flank, pulling them back to form a screen between his main formation and the Relay 7 bearing. This weakened the right flank, which he compensated by compressing the center element, bringing his 3 hammer cruisers forward into the line, which was suboptimal for their intended purpose but maintained engagement density where he needed it. Every adjustment created a new problem. He fixed each problem and created the next one. Funn. Strike element. I'm seeing it, Funn said. The certainty in Funn's voice was the kind that arrived after computation, not assumption. Bearing 291 by +4, holding position in the secondary cluster. Vorn designation I can't translate. Hull profile consistent with a modified courier hull, military engines, probably stripped for sprint speed. No heavy weapons signature. It's not here to fight. Flag it for Gallant and Strident. Done. Holt studied the flagged contact. The strike ship was sitting in the middle of the Vorn formation, surrounded by warships that were keeping it covered, not fighting around it but covering it, maintaining spacing around the contact that kept it out of every human engagement range. It was patient. It was waiting for the corridor to open. He had 9 minutes. All remaining fleet elements, New formation assignments transmitting now. He pushed the formation data to every captain simultaneously. New positions, new engagement sectors, new priority targets. You will receive instructions that appear to significantly weaken our engagement posture. They will. The trade-off is necessary. Please trust the geometry. This last was not something Holt normally said. He said it because he understood what he was asking, and because asking something unreasonable from professionals required at least naming the unreasonableness explicitly. Captain Varys of Archon came back 45 seconds later, after studying the formation data. Commander, if we pull the center element forward to compensate for the flank withdrawal, we're exposing the transition zone between sectors. The Vorrn will see it. Yes, Holt said. They'll hit it. They'll try. We'll manage it. With what? You've moved everything. Not Meridian. Holt looked at his own ship's positioning on the display. Meridian was a command cruiser, optimized for coordination and communication rather than pure combat tonnage, but she was not unarmed, and she was currently sitting in exactly the center of his revised formation, in the place where, if Varys was right, the Vorrn would probe the newly exposed transition zone. I'm plugging the gap with the flagship. There was a pause on the channel. Then Varys said, Understood, Commander. Archon acknowledges new tasking. That was the thing about Varys. She always ended with acknowledgement, even when she thought you were making a mistake. It was the most useful quality in a Captain Holt had ever encountered. He spent the next 6 minutes managing the transition, the reshuffling of 43 ships in contact, each one completing the specific three-dimensional spatial adjustment he needed while maintaining enough fire on their assigned Vorrn contacts to prevent those contacts from taking advantage of the movement. It was, tactically, like changing the position of every piece on a chessboard while the game continued to be played. Pieces moved, positions opened, positions closed, and the Vorrn responded to each change with the professional attention of a fleet that was watching a trap spring and adjusting to keep it from closing. They were adjusting, which meant they knew he had understood. Commander, Finn said, the Vorrn are reshaping the corridor. Show me. The corridor construction, which had been progressing on a fixed timeline, had changed. The Vorrn ships building the path were now moving faster, compressing what Finn had estimated as a 12-minute process into something shorter. They were accepting increased exposure to human fire to accelerate the breakthrough, which meant they had assessed that their timeline was compromised and were trying to break through before he finished repositioning. New estimate? Holt asked. Finn's hands moved across the console. 7 minutes. Maybe 6. He was not done repositioning. He was not close to done. How confident are you in that estimate? 80%. The remaining 20% is the possibility they're not actually accelerating. They're just moving and I'm misreading the intent. A pause. I don't think I'm misreading the intent. Neither do I, Holt said. He looked at the formation status, which showed 17 ships still in the process of transitioning to their new assignments. 17 ships that were not yet where he needed them. He did the arithmetic. Fun. Which 3 of those transitioning ships are most critical to the Relay 7 defense screen? Fun identified them in 10 seconds. Kyra, Resolve, and the frigate Thatch. Those 3, emergency sprint to assigned positions. Drop defensive engagement protocols, full thrust, accept the exposure. Everyone else, maintain current transition pace. It was not a safe order. Emergency sprint meant sacrificing the careful angle management that kept ships from presenting their weakest hull faces to enemy fire. Kyra took a hit before she reached her assigned position. Hull damage, 1 gun battery offline, but she got there. Resolve made it clean. Thatch arrived with 2% shields, having taken 3 hits in 30 seconds, and reported ready for duty in a voice that Holt found quietly remarkable. With 3 minutes to spare, the defense screen was not complete but was functional. 2 heavy cruisers on the Relay 7 bearing, 3 frigates in screening positions, a partial picket line that would see the strike ship before it could reach its target. It was not enough. Holt looked at the geometry and knew, with the precision of someone who had spent 11 years learning exactly this kind of knowledge, that it was not quite enough. The corridor was nearly open, what Holt had not fully accounted for, what he acknowledged to himself, in the private forensic part of his mind that was always running a post-battle analysis even while the battle was ongoing, was that the Vorrn would have anticipated the possibility of discovery. They had a plan for this. Of course they did. The formation shift began at minute 22 of the engagement, when it became apparent to the Vorn commanders that the human fleet was no longer fighting the battle it had been presented. The Vorn response was immediate and systematic. Rather than simply opening the corridor faster, they restructured their entire formation posture to simultaneously do three things: continue corridor construction, suppress the defense screen ships that Holt had repositioned, and engage Meridian specifically. The engagement of Meridian specifically was the part that Holt found interesting, because it told him something about the Vorn tactical analysis. They had identified his flagship's position as the coordinator of the human response. They were not wrong. Meridian's command and communications architecture was what made it possible for Holt to manage 43 ships in real time. Without her, the fleet would be fighting on individual captain judgment rather than integrated command, which was survivable but significantly less coherent. Taking Meridian out of the equation would not win the Vorn the battle, but it might slow the human response enough for the strike ship to complete its run. "We're being targeted," his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Sane, reported. "Not alarm. Observation." Sane ran tactical with a kind of affectless efficiency that Holt had learned to trust absolutely. "I see it," Holt said. "Don't evade yet. Let me understand what they're committing." He wanted to know how many ships the Vorn were dedicating to the Meridian engagement, because that number was a direct measure of how worried they were about his ability to coordinate the defense. The answer, which came clear over the next 90 seconds, was 4. 4 Vorn cruisers were breaking from the main engagement and vectoring toward Meridian, which was more than he would have expected, and told him the Vorn were very concerned about the human response. "That's a compliment," Sane said, with the particular dryness of a person who did not often make jokes. "Begin evasive now," Holt said. "Keep us in communication range of the defense screen. Don't sacrifice the command link for survivability." "Understood." Meridian began to move, and the bridge became slightly more complicated, as it always did when the flagship was both fighting and coordinating. Holt divided his attention between the command display and the tactical picture around his own ship, shifting between the two with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for a long time while also being aware, as he always was, that the moment of greatest danger was the moment when dividing attention seemed manageable and then abruptly was not. "Fun," he said. "Defense screen status. Gallant is taking heavy fire from 2 Vorn cruisers that repositioned from the left flank. Captain Mesa is managing but losing shield integrity. She's at 63%. Fun looked up. "Commander, the suppression of the defense screen is coordinated with the corridor construction. They're not separate operations. The timing is synchronized." Holt looked at the display. The Vorn were hitting Gallant and Strident hard enough to suppress their weapons capacity, not trying to destroy them, just to keep their guns busy and their captains focused on survival rather than offense. The corridor was opening behind the suppression screen. The strike ship was still patient in its pocket of protected space. The Vorn plan, Holt now understood fully, had been built in layers. The original layer: create a corridor, suppress any defense before it could establish itself, break the strike ship through before humans understood what was happening. The second layer, activated when the first was compromised: maintain pressure, suppress the human coordination capacity by going after Meridian, and continue the corridor construction at acceleration, betting that the human response, even a correct and intelligent response, could not fully deploy in time. It was a good plan. It was a plan built by someone who understood that discovery was possible and had engineered for the contingency. "The corridor opens in approximately 4 minutes, Fun said. At that point, the strike ship will commit to the run. Transit time to Relay 7 at its probable sprint speed, 11 minutes. Our defense screen as currently positioned can intercept at minute 8. 3 minutes of margin, Holt said. 2.5, Fun said, with the precision of someone correcting an approximation that mattered. I'm being generous. Can Gallant and Strident hold under this suppression fire until the strike ship commits? Fun's hesitation was brief but legible. Probably. Gallant is the concern. She took a rail hit early and the shield geometry is compromised on the port quarter. If they angle the suppression fire correctly, a pause while Fun ran the calculation. Yes. They know about the Gallant vulnerability. Watch for them to shift fire to the port quarter at the critical moment. Holt called Captain Mesa immediately. Mesa, your port quarter is compromised. The Vorn know about it. Expect a targeting shift in the next 2 minutes. Compensate by angling your hull. Present the starboard face. That drops my engagement arc on the corridor bearing, Mesa said. Clipped, precise. She had already run the trade-off. I know. Prioritize survival. I need you intact when the strike ship commits. Understood, Commander. A pause of less than 1 second. They're going to get through a gap in our coverage when I angle. I know, Holt said. I'm working on it. He was working on it. The gap created by gallant angling away from the corridor bearing was approximately 40 degrees of approach arc that would be unmonitored. Not unmonitored by the entire fleet. Meridian sensors could see everything, but unmonitored in the sense of having no ship positioned to physically intercept a contact transiting through it. A ship could emerge from the corridor into that 40-degree gap and be 11 minutes into its Relay 7 run before any of the defense screen ships could reorient to pursue. He could pull another ship from the line. He reviewed the roster of available ships quickly, ships that could reach the gap position in time, that he could spare from current engagement. The list resolved to 3 options. 2 of them were frigates with sprint speed adequate to the intercept if the strike ship moved at the upper end of his estimated performance envelope. 1 was a cruiser, Constance, that was currently the heaviest gun in the center engagement line. The gap in the center line, if he pulled Constance, would be severe. The Vorn would hit it. But the gap in the defense screen, if he didn't. Commander. Funn's voice had a quality to it that Holt had not heard before. Not alarm, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that meant the pattern had just changed. The corridor is opening faster than the timeline. They've committed 3 additional ships to the construction. A pause. They're accepting casualties to open it faster. Holt looked at the display. 3 Vorn ships had abandoned their cover positions and pushed forward into the corridor construction work, moving into human weapons range to accelerate the formation shift. 2 of them were already taking damage. They were taking the damage deliberately. They were buying time. How long? Holt said. 90 seconds, Funn said. The corridor opens in 90 seconds. Holt looked at the defense screen gap. He looked at Constance. He looked at the center line. He made the call. Constance, this is Commander Holt. Break engagement immediately. New tasking transmitting now. You're covering a gap in the defense screen on bearing 287 by +3. Sprint speed, full defensive posture. Acknowledge. Captain Dorn of Constance acknowledged immediately and without question. This was the thing about Dorn. She was one of those captains who read a situation fast and trusted the intelligence behind an order even when the order seemed to create new problems. Constance peeled out of the center line and drove hard toward the new position. The center line gap opened. The Vorn hit it. The next 4 minutes were the hardest sustained combat Meridian's bridge had experienced in engagement, and Holt managed it while also managing the defense screen and the corridor countdown and the approach of the 4 Vorn cruisers targeting his flagship, and somewhere underneath all of this he was also aware that he had made the correct call, but that correct calls were often expensive, and this one was going to cost him something. 3 ships in the center gap, Pelion, Pharaoh, and the small destroyer Crane, took heavy fire in the 2 minutes before the center element could reorganize to cover. Pelion reported engines damaged. Pharaoh took a hit that silenced one of her 3 main batteries. Crane was still fighting, but her hull integrity was at 61% and dropping. They were not destroyed. They were degraded. It was the price of the choice. The corridor opened. The strike ship moved. Holt saw the strike ship commit to its run at minute 29 of engagement, and the sight of it was exactly as unambiguous as he had expected. A single contact detaching from the Vorn formation and accelerating hard on the Relay 7 bearing, sprint engines at maximum output, driving for the gap. It came out at the edge of Gallant's reduced engagement arc. Not through the gap Gallant's angling had created, adjacent to it, using the shadow of the coverage reduction to mask its emergence for the critical first 15 seconds. Funn had seen this coming and had flagged the possibility 3 minutes earlier, which was why Holt had the contact designated and a weapon solution partially built before it fully resolved on the sensors. Contact committed, Sane announced. Sprint speed approximately 0.06 light. Bearing 291 by +4, vectoring for Relay 7. Intercept solutions transmitting to defense screen now. The defense screen responded. Gallant and Strident reoriented, abandoning their suppression response and committing to intercept geometry. The 3 frigate pickets adjusted. Constance, newly arrived at her covering position, began her own intercept solution. Holt watched the geometry. The strike ship was fast. It was, in fact, slightly faster than his upper-end performance estimate. His estimated maximum sprint speed had been 0.058 light, and this contact was doing 0.062, which was not a large difference but was a difference that mattered in an intercept calculation. The math resolved quickly. Gallant, intercept in 9 minutes, 14 seconds, at a range that would put the strike ship still 4 minutes from Relay 7. Good. Strident, intercept in 11 minutes, 30 seconds. The strike ship would be inside Relay 7's defensive perimeter before Strident could engage. Constance, intercept in 8 minutes, 52 seconds, at the cost of pushing her engines into emergency output territory that would likely leave her immobile after the engagement. The frigates, 2 of the 3 could intercept. Barely. In the range band where barely mattered. Gallant, Strident, and Constance have clean intercept solutions, Sane said. Frigates Thatch and Dawnward at marginal intercept confidence, 67% and 59%. 67% and 59%. Holt stared at those numbers. If everything went correctly, if Gallant intercepted on schedule, if her hull geometry remained functional, if the Vorrn main fleet did not redirect assets to cover the strike ship's run, then the intercept happened at the 4-minute from Relay 7 mark and the threat was contained. If anything went wrong, the margin was thin enough that the fallback depended on Constance, which was still in transit to intercept position and was burning her engines in a way that would likely leave her a derelict afterward. That was one price. The other price was that pulling Constance from the centerline gap had already cost Pelion her engines and Crane her hull integrity, and the centerline was still compromised. If the Vorrn redirected any additional assets into that gap. Commander. Funn's voice. The Vorrn main fleet is redirecting. Holt looked at the display. 3 Vorrn cruisers were breaking from the main engagement. Not toward the defense screen. Toward Gallant. He understood immediately. Not suppression this time, interdiction. The Vorrn were going to put those 3 cruisers between Gallant and the strike ship's run, preventing Gallant from executing the intercept. It was a sacrifice move. 3 cruisers burning hard into the most heavily contested zone of the battle, almost certainly not coming back, buying the strike ship the clearance it needed to reach Relay 7. The Vorrn were willing to lose 3 cruisers to get 1 corvette through to the relay station. Which told Holt something definitive about how much they needed this to work. Gallant will not be able to execute the intercept, Funn said. The voice was level. It was the levelness of someone who had computed something and was delivering the result without the luxury of softening it. The 3 Vorrn cruisers will intercept Gallant before Gallant can intercept the strike ship. This creates a 3-minute window during which no defense screen element can reach the strike ship. What about Strident and Constance? Strident arrives outside the window by 1 minute and 40 seconds. Constance arrives inside the window but at the extreme edge. She'll need her engines to survive it, and I'm not confident she has enough left. Funn pulled up the engine output numbers. She doesn't have enough left. Holt stood very still for 2 seconds. The frigates. Thatch at 67% confidence. Dawnward at 59%. If both run simultaneous intercepts, they can compensate for each other's margin of failure. Combined confidence goes to approximately 81%. 81%, Holt said. Yes. 19% chance Relay 7 takes a hit. 237 ships in deep space transit. Holt looked at the numbers and was aware, in a way that was cold and precise rather than emotional, that the job of commanding was sometimes the job of computing the cost of an imperfect world and then doing what the computation required. But before he did that computation, before he committed to the frigates and their 81% combined confidence, his eyes landed on a different contact on the display. Not the defense screen. Not the main fleet. Meridian. His own ship was currently positioned in the command zone, central, protected by the fleet geometry, optimized for communication and coordination rather than combat. She was not a fast ship. She was not a purpose-built interceptor. But she was in a position that the geometry, now that the engagement had shifted so dramatically from its initial shape, made into something unexpected. If Meridian moved now, full sprint, accepting the risk of abandoning the command zone, accepting the exposure from the 4 Vorrn cruisers still targeting her, she could be at the intercept point in 9 minutes. 7 minutes before the strike ship reached Relay 7. 2-minute margin. And she was Meridian. The command cruiser, the coordinating brain of the fleet. If she went forward, the fleet would be fighting on individual captain judgment. Gallant was already engaged with 3 incoming Vorrn cruisers. Constance was burning toward a position she could barely reach. Pelion had no engines. The center line was compromised. If he took Meridian off the board, the battle might come apart. If he didn't, Relay 7 had an 81% chance of survival. An 81% chance that 237 ships were not permanently stranded in deep space. Holt felt the decision arrive not as a thought but as a completed fact, the way certain decisions came, not deliberated but recognized. "Fun," he said. "You have fleet command." The silence on the bridge was total for approximately 1 second. "Commander, you have the board. Full authority. Meridian is going to the intercept. You know the situation better than anyone else on this bridge, and right now that matters more than any other qualification." He looked at Fawn directly. The eye contact was brief and complete. "Don't lose the center line." "I won't," Fawn said. And then, after a half-second, "Come back." It was not a military statement. Holt chose not to address it and went to the helm. "All ahead emergency," he said. "Intercept bearing 291 by +4. Weapons free on the strike contact." Meridian moved. What followed was 6 minutes that Holt would later be unable to completely reconstruct in sequence, because the experience of the thing was not sequential. It was simultaneous, layered, running on multiple tracks at once in a way that memory struggled to serialize afterward. He was aware of the 4 Vorrn cruisers tracking the course change and adjusting. He was aware of Sane building the weapon solution for the strike contact. He was aware, in the background, of the fleet channel carrying Fawn's voice, steady, calm, directing fleet elements with the same precision Holt would have, different in style but not in quality. He was aware of the strike ship's sprint speed and the closing geometry resolving on the tactical display in numbers that were ticking down in a way that was not yet comfortable but was becoming comfortable. Meridian took fire at minute 3 of the sprint. 2 hits, both absorbed by the forward shields, the second one pulling the port shield bank to 40%. Sane reported it without inflection. The Vorrn cruisers pursuing were not going to catch Meridian before she reached intercept range, but they were going to be shooting at her the entire time, and their fire was getting more accurate as the range closed. Holt did not evade. Evasion cost speed. Speed was the margin. At minute 5, the weapons solution on the strike ship went green. "Solution confirmed," Sane said. "Strike contact at engagement range in 40 seconds. Hold fire until optimal range," Holt said. "I want clean hits." The 40 seconds passed in a way that was absolutely clear in Holt's memory. Present, precise, each second its own complete fact. The strike ship resolved on the display from a contact to a silhouette, a Vorrn courier hull converted for military sprint, stripped to the bare structure for speed, carrying what was presumably a directed energy emitter capable of disabling a relay station's coordination systems. Fast and purposeful and committed to its run in a way that spoke to a crew that had been told what was at stake and had accepted the mission accordingly. They were good soldiers. Holt did not think this at the time, but he would think it later. "Range optimal," Sane said. "Firing solution locked." "Fire," Holt said. Meridian's guns fired in 3-second sequence, rail batteries, then energy, then the second rail battery. The strike ship's sprint speed made targeting difficult at this range, but the solution had been built carefully and the first salvo hit. The second hit. The third went wide, but the first 2 had done the work. The strike ship's engines went dark. Not destroyed, disabled. The hull was intact, the crew was probably alive, the ship was tumbling slowly on its last committed vector, no longer under power, no longer a threat to anything. Holt watched it for 3 seconds to be sure. Then he looked at where it had gotten to. The navigation display showed the contact's final position against the Relay 7 marker. The number in the distance field read 0:30. 30 seconds. The strike ship had been 30 seconds from Relay 7 when Meridian's guns had disabled it. Holt stared at that number. 30 seconds at 0.062 light was a distance of approximately 558,000 kilometers. 30 seconds was the margin between a network node going dark and 237 ships maintaining their jump coordinates. 30 seconds. He realized he had been looking at it for longer than he intended when Sane said, carefully, "Commander, The Vorrn main fleet is withdrawing. Holt looked up. The withdrawal was methodical, which was characteristic of the Vorrn and which Holt had always found professionally admirable in an enemy. A fleet that could withdraw as cleanly as this one was a fleet that had retained unit cohesion under severe stress and maintained command discipline through a major tactical failure. The 3 Vorrn cruisers that had moved to suppress Gallant broke off their engagement and rejoined the main body. The corridor construction ships fell back into standard formation. The entire fleet pivoted on a coordinated heading and began to put distance between itself and the human position. They left the strike ship behind. The disabled courier hull continued its slow tumble. Holt looked at it for a moment and then redirected a frigate to stand by for rescue or salvage, depending on what the crew elected when they were contacted. The fleet channel came alive with the noise that filled every channel after an engagement. Damage reports, status requests, the practical vocabulary of a fleet that had been fighting and was now assessing. Holt listened to it with a part of his attention that was managing the immediate aftermath, while the larger part of him returned, repeatedly, to the number on the display. 30 seconds. Fleet status, he said. The report took 4 minutes to assemble, because fleet status reports always took longer than they should after a fight, because that was when you learned what you had actually traded. The summary, when Sane compiled it: Pelion was adrift without engines, crew intact, emergency beacon active, a tug from the nearest station could reach her in 6 hours. Crane had hull integrity at 58% and 3 casualties, 2 of them serious. Gallant had taken heavy fire during the suppression engagement with the 3 Vorrn cruisers and was operational but damaged. Captain Mesa reported 11% shields and 2 gun batteries offline, hull integrity at 71%, no dead, for injured. Constance's engines were at 14%. She could maneuver slowly and nothing more, and would need a tow to the nearest port. Faro was operational with reduced weapons capacity. Thatch was fully operational and had a crew that had been through a great deal in the last 40 minutes. No ships destroyed. No crew lost permanently to the battle, in the sense that everyone who had been alive at the start was still alive at the end, though some of them were going to spend weeks in medical. Considering the scope and intelligence of the Vorrn operation, Holt found this outcome remarkable. He filed the thought in the same place he was already filing the 30 seconds. Von returned fleet command formally at the moment of Vorrn withdrawal, which was the correct protocol. The emergency authority reverted when the emergency was concluded. The formality of the return was characteristic of Von, who Holt had observed treated all command protocols with the kind of scrupulous attention that came either from a very methodical nature or from being the only person on the bridge who occupied a permanently ambiguous position and had decided that perfect procedure was a reliable substitute for conventional legitimacy. Holt had never asked which it was. It seemed unkind to ask. "Good work," Holt said, when Von handed back the board. Von said nothing in response, which was also characteristic. Von did not treat compliments as requiring response. The fleet began the housekeeping of aftermath, casualty assessments, damage control, coordination with the nearest stations for tug and support elements, the beginning of the after-action record that would eventually become a report that would eventually be read by people who had not been there and would therefore, inevitably, understand it imperfectly. Holt was always aware of this cycle and found it a reliable source of what he could only call professional melancholy. He left Sane managing the aftermath and went to the navigation station, where the tactical display still carried the full record of the engagement. Every ship movement, every weapons firing, every formation shift from both sides, logged and time-stamped with the precision of a system designed to capture exactly this kind of data. He pulled up the strike ship's final recorded position. 0:30. He had been looking at it for perhaps 2 minutes when Von appeared at his elbow, which was something Von occasionally did, materialized without announcement in positions that implied a decision had been made to come there, without any of the intermediate steps being visible. How far does 0.062 light cover in 30 seconds? Von asked. Not asking, computing out loud, the way Von sometimes did when the computation was so straightforward that stating it was the same as sharing it. 558,000 kilometers, Holt said. Give or take. The Relay 7 defensive perimeter is 600,000 kilometers. Holt had already looked that up. So it was inside the perimeter, Von said. No. Not quite. He showed Von the geometry. The perimeter is the outer edge of the station's active defensive systems. At 558,000 kilometers, the strike ship would have been approaching the perimeter but not yet through it. Relay 7's active defense could have engaged it before it reached effective range. Probably, Finn said. Probably, Holt agreed. They both looked at the number. The thing about the 30 seconds was not that the strike ship had necessarily succeeded if it had reached its objective. The thing about the 30 seconds was how close the entire question had been to not being a question Holt had answered. If he had not seen the corridor construction at minute 11. If he had seen it at minute 15 or 20. If Fun had not identified the strike ship in the formation when they did. If Constance had been slower, or the engine estimate less accurate, or the Vorn interdiction ships had reached Gallant 2 minutes earlier. Any of it. Any single thread pulled slightly differently and the geometry of the intercept changed, and the strike ship reached its target 30 seconds earlier, which was 30 seconds before Meridian could have gotten there. Or not, because Relay 7 had its own defenses, and those defenses might have handled a single corvette. Probably. The defensive system was designed for exactly this threat, and the people who designed it were not incompetent. But probably was not the same as certainly, and 30 seconds was not the same as 5 minutes. The Vorn had planned this with enormous intelligence. They had planned for discovery. They had engineered multiple layers. They had been willing to sacrifice significant fleet elements to create the opening. And they had gotten their strike ship to 30 seconds from its objective before it was stopped. They had been 30 seconds from winning. Not the engagement, the campaign. 237 ships stranded. A network node dark. A strategic situation that would have taken months or years to repair, if it could be repaired at all. 30 seconds. Holt looked at the number for a long time. He was aware, in a distant way, that the bridge was functioning around him, Sane managing the aftermath, communications officers processing the routine traffic of fleet recovery, Lieutenant Rask updating the navigation record with the battle positions. The ordinary mechanisms of a ship doing its work. He was aware of all of it and present in none of it, because his attention was entirely on the display. He thought about the Vorn commanders who had designed this operation. He thought about the amount of planning that had gone into it, the formation analysis, the corridor engineering, the timing, the contingency layers for discovery, the use of sacrificial assets to preserve the strike ship's run. He thought about the fact that they had come this close, and that coming this close meant they would study what went wrong and try again, differently, with better timing, with additional contingency layers for the scenario in which the human commander identified the corridor even earlier. The next version of this plan would be harder to stop. He thought about what he would do differently, himself, if he were designing the next version. He thought about it with a part of his mind that had always been able to inhabit an adversary's perspective, not with sympathy, exactly, but with the professional attention that effective opposition required. The answer that came was that he would start the corridor construction later, closer to the moment of commitment, to reduce the observation window. He would use smaller formation shifts to reduce the legibility of the pattern. He would introduce deliberate false corridors to complicate the analysis. He would not target the flagship. Targeting the flagship had told the human commander exactly how worried the Vorn were, which had given him information he had used. They would figure out some version of this. Maybe all of it. The next operation would be better. Holt reached out and saved the battle record to a personal archive. Not the official record, that was being compiled by Sane and would go through the standard channels. This was a personal copy of the full tactical log, every second of the engagement from first contact to Vorn withdrawal, tagged and indexed in a format he could search and annotate. He had a collection of these. Engagements where something had happened that he wanted to keep studying. Moments where the margin had been close enough that the closeness itself was the lesson. The 30 seconds went into the archive. He would look at it again tomorrow. He would look at it many times in the weeks after the engagement, when the after-action report was being written and he was trying to translate what had happened into the careful language of official record. He would look at it when, 3 months later, the Vorn mounted a second operation against the relay network. Different approach, different methodology, the lessons they had learned from this failure applied with the thoroughness of a highly competent opponent, and he would find that having spent this time with the 30 seconds had prepared him for some of what they tried. Not all of it. They were good. But some. He would study the 30 seconds for years. He was certain of this in the way that he was certain of other things that had proven themselves true over the course of his career. The way an engagement had a grain to it, like wood, that you could only learn by handling it repeatedly. The way some numbers, once you had looked at them long enough, became the kind of knowledge that was not stored in the mind but somewhere more durable. He stood at the display for another minute. Then he straightened and turned back to the bridge. "Lieutenant Sane," he said, "send a status confirmation to Relay 7. Advise them the threat is contained and they can stand down from emergency protocol." "Yes, Commander." "And get me a full medical status on Crane. I want to know about the 2 serious casualties." "Already compiling, sir." He went back to the command station. The display was full of the ordinary work of Aftermath. He picked up the threads of it, one by one, and began. The battle for the jump network corridor at Kerith Debris Field was recorded in the official Admiralty archive as a human strategic victory. The tactical assessment noted the successful identification of a complex Vorn deception operation under combat conditions and the effective restructuring of fleet posture in response. The assessment did not note the 30 seconds, because 30 seconds was not a thing the assessment had a category for. Commander Holt read the official assessment and filed it. Then he went back to his personal archive and continued studying.